my name is Mark. I'm the pastor at our church. A few years ago, well, 5 or 6 now, my family and I, we moved up here to Northwest Indiana where we didn't know anyone. We're like, yeah, let's start a church, and let's help people take their next steps towards Jesus. And so that's been the heart's desire. And so we talked about, like, what is your next step? And maybe this week your next step is eating some Chick-fil-A. Because there's a great opportunity for us to partner with White's Residential Institute, which helps with foster care and the adoption agencies and stuff like that. And so in our Chick-fil-A here in Merrillville on US 30, they're going to be having a night on Tuesday, I believe. I can't read from back there, but yeah, the 5th, and so you can go in there and you get to know what they do, eat some Chick-fil-A. It's a great thing, right? The next step that you may have is like getting connected with some people here, because we talk about this, we're not just a church service, we're actually a church, and so there's a difference between going to church and there's a difference between being the church, and so what we want to help you do is be the church, and so in order to do that, you may have to connect with some people. So starting April 20th for 6 weeks, Angela and Roland Nightingale, they're going to help out with this. They're going to lead this small group, and they're going to take people through the book of Galatians and just read the Bible together. And so connect with each other and stuff like that. You can sign up for those groups online at RE.THINK Church.cc. Look for the tab that says groups. It's very creatively labeled. But there's that one. So there's that couple process. And so that's what we really, really want to help out with, is helping you take your next steps towards Jesus. And so the other one is this. Maybe some of you know Jesus, and maybe some of you are like, hey, I've connected with him. And I don't know if you know the rhythm of Easter, like the calendar of Easter is coming. And so we take time and we say, hey, for the next 14 days, what would happen if you just prayed for people in your life? That God would bring that to your attention and say, who are the top 3 that Jesus really, if you showed up, it would change their life? And so think through who your 3 are. And then just take time for the next 14 days and just really, really pray. Say, God, how would you do this, and how would you show up in their life? And ask God for wisdom, when to invite them, when to encourage them, when to pray for them, and all of that, and stuff like that. And so here at RE.THINK Church, we just want to help you take your next steps towards Jesus. We want to be a safe place for you to explore your faith. Maybe you've given up on church. Maybe you just walked away from church in general. We just want to be a safe place for you to find what that faith is, and then take your next steps towards Jesus in that regard. And if you want to partner with us financially, there's a couple ways you can do that. We have a black box in the back, which is over there by the door. You can also go to RE.THINKChurch.cc, click on the Give tab, and go from there. And that helps us keep us reaching out in the community and all of that. And some of you know my story where I was a pastor for a while, and then I gave up on being a pastor because I was like, it's not as flashy as I thought it was going to be, and stuff like that. And it was the perfect storm of my immaturity and some other stuff that was going on. It was a great time. So we moved from Florida to Michigan, and I was in Battle Creek, Michigan. I worked in production management for a Toyota company, but I was ordained, and that was the catch. So I got a phone call one. I don't know if you know this, Mark, but you called me on a Thursday afternoon. And you were like, hey, are you attending Wesleyan Church? And I was like, no, I'm not. And he was like, well, I'm going to encourage you to find a Wesleyan Church to go to. And I was like, what does that mean, encourage? Yeah. So here's what happened. We, Heather and I, found a church that we settled on. We didn't hate it. I'll put it that way. It was large enough that I could walk around and drop the boys off, and Heather was in there doing her thing in the church. Eventually she comes on staff, and then I start volunteering in the church. I was a large group teacher for 3 and 4-year-olds. So, safe little place for me to just teach the Bible, right? But it all happened because of a phone call from Mark saying, hey, you should probably connect with the church, get involved, and go from there. And then eventually came on staff, and this is where God really said, 2015, it's time for you to leave that church, and you don't know what's next. So without that phone call, who knows what happens?
That's crazy. Wow.
So, and share a word from us. So, he gets to partner and pastor churches all across Indiana.
Wow. That's good. You're good today, bro. I'm glad you took that word of encouragement. Oh, that's so cool. And it's a joy to be with you. I've been up a couple of different times and always love coming. love just the sense of God's presence and the freedom, right? That you're not bound up and you got to do things like a certain way that they've always been done for 300 years or whatever. It's like, what's God doing today and how's God at work in the world? And so I celebrate that with you. It's a joy to be with you on this special occasion. And kind of like my official hat, I'm sort of a coach for pastors. We have 108 congregations make up what's known as a crossroads district, like we're the crossroads of America. So we're going to go with that one from the south side of Indianapolis up to the sandy shores of Lake Michigan. Makes it sound like a travel brochure, doesn't it? From Illinois over to Ohio. And what I love, every Sunday I'm in a different kind of church, and it takes all kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people. And I'm glad you found a place like RE.THINK Church that speaks to your heart. It's fun for me because some Sundays I'll be in a church where I don't understand a single word. We have some Burmese congregations. I literally don't understand a single word. But man, to hear their heart as they sing and to be part of that fellowship is just such an encouragement. And then we have several Hispanic congregations. In fact, two of our newest ones were formed with Venezuelan refugees who've come up all the social unrest, the difficulties there, and they're just doing a great job. In fact, I'll be there next Sunday afternoon. It's called Cielos Abiertos. Doesn't it just sound musical? It means open heavens, Cielos Abiertos. So I'll be with them on Sunday, and I do understand a few more words, but piquito, just a few, very few words. But I absolutely love the potlucks, right? When we have a great time when we eat together and love their heart. And we got churches, literally the music's loud enough, they hand out earplugs for old people like me. So it's like, they come on in, but you better cover up. And they got places, man, I'm like, come on, could you kick it up a notch? So everybody takes different. We've got churches in the cities like you guys are, kind of on the east side here of Chicago. And we've got little country churches. I don't know if you can even find it, but a little church down here called Fowler Church. It's probably about an hour south of you guys between here and Lafayette. And an 82-year-old woman pastors this church. And she has got a heart for hurting people in that little community, little rural community. She finally had to get a bigger vehicle because she gives people a drive to the grocery store so they can buy groceries because there's very little food where they are, little options there. So she takes senior citizens down to Lafayette in her buggy now. And so she was so excited how God had provided. But I get a chance just to come along and celebrate the ways that God's at work. And one of the ways God's at work is starting new things. And I love what Mark and Heather did. They just didn't come up here and just kind of like, well, it sounds like a good idea. I mean, God grabbed them, put his calling on their hearts and lives, and almost dragged them. Dragged them like, I've got a purpose and a place for you. And I just thought, I want to salute you, Mark and Heather. It was so fun last night to sit with you guys and just to hear how God's been answering those prayers in your faithfulness. I hope you know you have an amazing pastor, and his wife's even better than he is. Is that, can I say that? Which is true in our family too, so I can say that, right? I get that. But man, it's just so good to be with you and to celebrate. God is on the move. We just planted another couple of churches during the pandemic. We didn't get the memo, so we just kept going. And we planted one over in Roanoke, which is just southwest of Fort Wayne, over in Allen County. Church called Arise, a Filipino pastor, multicultural church there. Just a cool story what God's doing. And then just literally, it's like 7 weeks ago, was it, Mark? We planted one church down in Westfield, which is a suburb kind of on the north and west coming out of Indianapolis. And they call it one church because it's church for the one. That Jesus left the 99 and that were safe, right? And went after the one. And the guy who planted it is 26 years old. He went to high school there in Westfield, played basketball there, and his heart was broken for his classmates and basketball teammates who didn't know Jesus and who were just struggling as young adults trying to figure out, like, does God have a plan for me, have a purpose? And so Andy and Leonza, his wife, they stepped out in faith just like Mark and Heather. And they're there planting today. And that's possible because of our partnership, our district partners, in cool ways like that. So thank you for what you do. Thanks for leading so beautifully in this space. And you guys, thank you, Russell and Anna, for your ministry, the way you led us in worship this morning. Man, my heart just filled up. So thanks so very much. Have you ever been in a place in your life that's just so difficult, like things are such a mess that you wonder, has God forgotten about you? Like God just forgot, or even worse, that God's out to get you. Like, oh wow, things have really come off the rails. Like this is a mess. It's a really bad situation. We're going to take a little break from your Ephesians study because I know you're going to be there for about 3.5, 4 more years, something like that, right? But this morning we're going to jump into back in the Old Testament. If you have it on your app, you'll find it really fast. If you have to turn your pages in your Bible, when you get to Jeremiah, it's tucked between Jeremiah and Ezekiel. It's a little book called Lamentations. Lamentations, a really tiny little book, only 5 chapters long. And for those of you who like to study the Bible and kind of know the context and history here, you know that Lamentations is literally a book of funeral poems. Someone called it the Hymnal of Heartbreak, or the Book of the Blues. Like, this is a poem, it's actually a series of 5 poems written very much like a form of a funeral poem or a dirge. And you'd find that if you look at the first chapter and the second chapter, they each have 22 verses. And you say, well, what's up with that? Well, if you're reading it in Hebrew, and I'm not, but if you were reading it in Hebrew, you would see that every verse starts with the letter, corresponding letter of the Hebrew alphabet. There are 22 letters. So 22 verses, an acrostic poem. You've seen, maybe you did some of those in elementary school, like A is for apple, and B is for butterfly, and it was that kind of thing. And so every one of those verses, 22 times. Then you get to chapter 3, and it goes to 66. Well, what's going on here? He literally, the prophet takes that same form, but adds 3 times. A, B, C, and pours out his heart around this poetic form. In chapter 4, he goes back to the 22 verses, and then chapter 5, he just loses it. Like the form completely breaks down. Maybe some of you have been there like, I got a great plan, I got a great structure, this is working, and then it's just like, God, here's what's going on, I need help, my heart is broken. So you say, well, what's the context for this? Like, where is this coming from? For those, again, who are Bible scholars like your pastor is, and he is a good one, but you would know that the temple is destroyed when there's a siege that comes against the city. When the foreign armies come up, the Babylonians have laid siege. They've been there almost 2 years, like from 588 BC to 586 BC, and finally they just kind of, like, it's all in and we're going after them. They come in and they destroy the city. They tear up the walls. They kill people. Just blood is running in the streets, and they desecrate the temple of God. And it's devastation. It's horribly, just completely devastating to them. And here's this dude, this guy, Jeremiah, who has for years now warned the people. It's one thing when stuff comes on you and you didn't see it coming, right? That's hard enough. Oh, wow, where did that come from? It's another thing when your parents maybe told you that if you do this, this is what's going to happen. No, I'm serious. If you do this, this is what's... And over and over and over, Jeremiah had warned them from God. He'd said, don't do this. Stop. Turn away from your sin. Turn away from your idolatry. Turn away from chasing your dreams and your illusions. And turn back to God. Because if you don't, God has promised that He will punish. Like, there is a payday someday. It doesn't always come immediately, right? But there is a time when the consequences of our actions come back. God had warned them. And that's what's heartbreaking to Jeremiah. He's tried so faithfully to call these people to repent, but they haven't done it. So now you find yourself with this prophet. He's sitting on a hill looking back over this city that's been destroyed. And just the heartbreak. He can hear the wailing cries of mothers. He can see the dust and the smoke rising in the sky from the devastation of the temple. His heart's breaking, and he's sitting on a hill. Some scholars suggest he's sitting on the very hill called Golgotha, where Jesus will be crucified Easter week, right? But he's sitting there looking back at Jerusalem with this brokenheartedness, and he's just wondering, like, God, how could this happen? Like, what is going on? How can you have a plan? I don't see it. I don't get it. So if you turn to Lamentations chapter 3, I just want to share a few of these verses with you, because I wonder if sometimes in my life I haven't been in a situation where I've just said, God, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. What's going on? And what do you want me to do? How do I respond to it? If you go to Lamentations chapter 3, you read verses like this, beginning in verse 19. I remember my affliction and my wanderings, the bitterness and the gall, like the vinegar taste. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. Anybody ever felt like that? Like my soul, literally, it's fallen out. My heart is falling through the floor here. That's what I'm experiencing. I well remember that. I thought, isn't that interesting? I don't know about you, but I have a tendency to remember things that went bad. Like if you ask me about my worst experience in junior high school, I won't tell you, but I can remember it, right? Maybe you can't. You're like, the worst thing that ever happened to me. And you say, what was the best thing? You have to kind of sometimes stop about that. It's like the pain sort of sears memories in our minds, and we can be almost controlled by those painful experiences, and we kind of find ourselves living out that script because of all the things that have happened in the past. He says, well, I remember this, and my soul is downcast within me. What I choose to think about in God's scheme of things does affect how I respond. Like where I choose to set my mind. He says, when I'm thinking about all the things that I've experienced, all this pain, my soul is downcast. And then verse 21 flips a switch, turns a corner. And I always love that in the story. Like, suspense, 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 and then something happens. Well, here it is. That verse turns this corner. He says, yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. He says, I stop. I couldn't just focus on that, but I stop and I think. I turn my mind to the things of God, to God's promises, to who He is, and therefore I have hope. Why? Because verse 22 says, because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. You're like, whoa, wait a second. Like the city, Mark just told us the city was devastated. Like everything's been destroyed and the temple's been desecrated. This is horrible. Like, what do you mean we've not been consumed? If you wind the clock back, you'll find out that when the king of Babylon first came down against him, one of the things he did was he took young leaders, princes and the most beautiful young princesses. He took the cream of the crop. He took this young generation and pulled them out of there and took them down into Babylon. You've heard names, maybe Bible names like Daniel and Esther. They're part of what was known as the remnant. God had literally allowed the king to pull out this group of people and preserve them in the midst of all this other devastation. That He had a plan and a purpose ahead of time. Sometimes we read Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10. It says, I know the plans I have for you, plans to give you a future and a hope. Anybody ever seen that? Maybe a cross stitch or sometimes even a billboard, a future and a hope. That was spoken to these people who were in captivity, that someday God would bring them back to the land. So God has a remnant. He has a plan. He has a purpose. And can I just say that to you? It doesn't matter how crazy things are in your life right now, God has not given up on you. Amen. He's not given. It may feel that way, right? It may feel like everything's stacked against you, and it's the worst scenario you could ever imagine. But please know this: God still has a plan. His purposes for your life can still be fulfilled. In the past, he said, I look back and I see that God has preserved for us this remnant. And there's a wonderful little word in there in verse 22. And in most of our Bibles, it's listed as two words. You might see this word, great love. Great love. Now, it's a word in the Hebrew that has kind of a funny sound to it, because I'm from Canada, so I already talk funny. I say out in the boat, right? You're like, where's that dude from? That's out in the boat. Maybe Upper Peninsula of Michigan or someplace. But I'm from Canada. And so this word sounds a little hard for me to pronounce. Like let me try it. Hesed. Did I get close? You can try it too, but don't aim at anybody when you say it, all right? 1, 2, 3. Hesed. It's just kind of, it's gone. Anyway, you pronounce it. It is a word that's used 250 times to describe God's character. It's not just something He does, it's who He is. He's a God of never failing, unending love. His great love, it's called here. Sometimes it's called His everlasting love. It's a covenantal love. It's not infatuation, right? We've got a world. I laugh when I think about the songs that we listen to. Like, I'm a little older than some of you. Most of you. Okay, all of you. But I remember songs from the 60s and 70s about puppy love, right? All these songs about puppy love. And it's all about infatuation. That seems to be kind of our world saying, ooh, I've got a tickle. I've got a quiver in my liver. I'm in love. That kind of thing. I'm all shook up. All that. But this is not that kind of love. This is a love. I think about the Lord of the Rings movie. Anybody old enough to remember Lord of the Rings movies? Okay? And Samwise Gamgee and our little friend Frodo, there's this bond of brothers. Like, they will literally die for each other. It's that kind of love. Okay? There's nothing that can stop them from loving. And God, in His infinite way, just imagine it exponentially larger. That's the kind of love He's expressing. That even in the times in our lives when it seems like everything's going wrong, God hasn't changed. Our circumstances have changed. What we're dealing with may have changed, but God has not changed. And His chesed is always constant. It's always faithful. So because of the Lord's chesed, we are not consumed, for His compassions never fail. Now there's beautiful verses found. Sometimes the very darkest night, all of a sudden one star appears. You can just see like one, and it seems to be so bright against the darkness of the sky. I think about this verse that way, because if you read chapter 1 through 5, if you're not depressed before you start reading, you can be depressed. If anybody wants to be depressed, read 5 chapters. It's like, it is just really heavy stuff. But you get to this verse, and it says, but your compassions never fail. They are new. Your mercies are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Wow. Great is your faithfulness. The people of God had seen his faithfulness in the past. Certainly you think about the Exodus, you think about God's deliverance, you think about the miracles, you think about David and Goliath. I mean, there's so many times you can see how God was faithful to them. And in this circumstance, when it seems like they've completely lost their way and all hope is gone, their best hope is to look to God. When it seems like nothing else will work, there's never a better time to say, God, I need you. And they do. They begin to look and call anew to God. He said, I will look to God because his compassion never failed. They're new every morning. Great is your faithfulness, O God. And I will say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will wait for him. See, there's kind of three looks here. There's a look back. You can look back and see how things have been. And you could focus on the horrible things that have happened to you. But I choose to look back and see how God has so faithfully led, like his fingerprints are on my life. And they're on your life. When you look back, you can say, oh, I remember this time. Or that happened. Or this person came across my pathway. Or God intervened. Or even a phone call. Like God was at work in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. So we can choose to look back and see our life that way. We can look at this present moment and look around us, and there's lots of reasons to be discouraged or depressed when you think about the current situation, either of our world. I mean, you think what we're walking through, this whole crazy pandemic thing. You think about the unrest in our nation, the pain, the injustice here. You think about a war. I don't think it's the Third World War, but there's a war. You don't check the news. Something's going on in Ukraine, right? We have Wesleyan missionaries who are there in Czech and Poland, and they're serving those refugees. I mean, that's real pain. Real stuff's happening. But we can also choose to say, even now today, I see God at work. And then there's this future look that you see. You find it in verse 24. He said, I will say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will wait for him. The Lord is good to those whose hope is in him, to the one who seeks him. So when we look back, you can see God's fingerprints. When you look around today, you say, God's at work here. But there's this sense of hope that comes in the life of the Christian. And can I tell you, this Easter season, Pastor Mark mentioned it, there are people that you know, friends, loved ones, co-workers, neighbors, who are asking deep questions about like what we've been through in the pandemic, or what's going on with injustice, or what's happening in the world. And they don't have hope. They don't have confidence. They're asking questions and they're not finding good answers. And I just want to encourage you today, you have that answer. Right? It's Jesus. He's the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. You have hope. When we come to Easter, it reminds us that we are people of hope. When Friday comes and the tomb is filled and the skies are dark, it's not over. The last chapter has not been written. Jesus rises again on Easter Sunday. We are people of hope. If there's one thing that can characterize our lives, it ought to be hope. In fact, Peter will say this later on. He'll say, always be ready to give a reason to answer anyone who asks you, why do you have such hope? See, hope is something that can be seen. Hope isn't something, it's an expression in our face. It can be in the steps that we take, the actions, how we act in love to people, how we're not defensive, how we respond with love. There's a lot of things that hope evidence itself at. But people of hope, there's something different. You know when you meet a person who's got hope, like, what's up with you? Like, what are you expecting? You know, I had a birthday today, so thank you very much. Yeah, I am older by one day than I was yesterday. And I thought it was all, you know, we're here, we're far away from home. My kids are living in Michigan and Florida, so I'm like, oh. And I got back from the treadmill this morning, got on, went into the restroom, and I looked at somebody that I love, my wife, had hung a banner, happy birthday, right? And there was, I didn't know I was going to have something to look forward to. She even had dark chocolate. That's the only kind of chocolate, right? The darker the better. And just the thought of things to look forward to, but it's not little things like that. The things that we have to look forward to are the fact that God walks with us every day. No matter how difficult your situation, you are not alone. You have a community of faith here that God has given you. You have people who are praying for you. I got to be part of a circle this morning of people who prayed. Before you ever walked through the doors of this building or joined us online, there were people who were praying and saying, God, we want to see you move. We want you to do in our lives what only you can do. God is amazing, and God will answer us in those difficult times. I don't know if you've ever heard the name J.C. Penney. Have you heard that name? Oh, okay, J.C. Penney. Do you know what his full name was? Somebody knows this probably. We do trivia here this morning. His full name was James Cash Penney. Wow. Cash Penney sounds like a hashtag, like some kind of rapper. Hey, I'm Cash Penney. And James Cash Penney. And he had started started a string of little dry goods stores, retail stores, before the Great Depression, and they had made some progress. He was earning some money. It was called the Golden Rule stores. He wanted to be good unto others like they were unto him, treat them right. But during the Depression, like many other business people, he was losing everything. In fact, not just his financial well-being, but he was losing his health, the stress of it all, and then things had really gotten strange. In fact, let me just read a quote he wrote this. He said, "I was at the end of my rope. My business had crumbled, my communications with my colleagues had faltered, and even my wife and children were estranged from me. It was all my fault." He was contemplating suicide. A friend convinced him to enter a treatment facility up in Battle Creek, Michigan, of all places, right?
Wow.
And the rest of the medical attention was doing him some good, but there was a morning that changed everything. He got up one morning a little early for breakfast, so he's just kind of wandering the halls when he hears music, and he's like, "What's up with that?" So he wanders down the hall, hears the singing, and finds his way down to what turns out to be a chapel where the nurses and doctors are coming together for a little time of worship and word before they go to care for people all day long in this facility. And as he's listening, he hears them sing an old song. I didn't hardly even know the song, but the words spoke to him. It says, "Be not dismayed, whatever betide, God will take care of you. All that you need, He will provide. God will take care of you. God will take care of you every day." Something like that, the tune. So he's listening now. It draws him into the back of the room, and as he's there, he hears the scripture verse. Some of you know this one. "Come unto me, all you that are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest." And he said this, "At that time something happened to me which I cannot explain. It was a life-changing miracle, and I've been a different person ever since I saw God in His glory." Can I tell you that? If you've not experienced that, if you've never had that moment with Jesus where you literally just kind of surrendered, just kind of dropped your guard and said, "God, I'm all in, take me, I'm yours," there's something miraculous, transformative that can happen in a moment of time. Yeah, it's a journey. I get it. It's a journey to the cross, and it's a journey beyond with Jesus. But there is a moment when you can step across the line of faith, say, "God, I'm here, I'm yours, I need you, please come into my life. Forgive me, change me, make me new." And in that moment, he said, I became a different person. He said, "Lord, will you take care of me? I can do nothing for myself." That's absolute surrender. Like, I give up. I just yield. Well, over the next few years, God restored not only his health and his finances, but restored his family too. And J.C. Penney went on to serve the Lord for many, many years. He died at age 95. 95. So he came back pretty strong. And he came back financially, and as I said, God blessed him. He would share a Bible verse with people that he had memorized. It said, "I've trusted in the Lord without wavering. Prove me, Lord, and try me. Test my heart, my mind, or examine me, Lord. For your steadfast love," guess what word that is? Chesed. "For your chesed is before my eyes." That's what I'm looking at. I'm focused on your love, and I will walk in faithfulness to you. See, I can promise you this, at 63 years of age, I can tell you this, God has never failed me, but I have failed him lots of times. But he's proven himself faithful, and when I come back in repentance and turn back and say, "God, I need you, please. Pick me up, clean me off, set my feet on the ground, and keep me going forward." God wants to do that, and he's so beautifully faithful. But sometimes things don't turn out the way you want them to. Sometimes the story doesn't have a happy ending. Is God faithful even then? Let me tell you about a guy named Thomas Chisholm. You probably don't know this name, but Thomas Chisholm was born down in Kentucky, Franklin, Kentucky, back in the 1860s. Became a school teacher at age 16. That wouldn't happen much today, although somebody back there is teaching school. They're like 19, right? It's something that could happen. So he's there and teaching at school, and at age 27, he went to a church service and heard the gospel and gave his life to Jesus Christ. Shortly thereafter, as he's seeking God's direction, he senses he's supposed to be a minister, like I'm supposed to prepare myself to preach. I can't think of anything I'd rather do. I'm going to do that. I'm going to chase it. So he reads, he studies, he goes through the examinations, and he's finally ordained to become a pastor. And they appoint him to a church in Scottsville, Kentucky. He goes to serve the church, and his health falls apart. He's like, what? Like, I prepared myself. I'm answering God's, how could this be wrong? And yet he's so physically depleted that he can't continue on. He serves for only 1 year. First, it would have been very discouraging, but he said, God, there must be some other plan. He ends up moving up to Warsaw, Indiana. He's there, and someone helps him to get started, and so he's able to sell insurance, but he just can't stop wanting to express the goodness of God, God's faithfulness in life. So he writes poetry. Maybe some of you again are poets or songwriters. He ended up writing over 1,200 1,200 poems. And many of those were put to music. In fact, one of those poems made its way over to a college here in Chicago, Moody Bible College. And there at that college, they put music to his words. And then somehow that song made its way to a guy named George Beverly Shea, who you probably don't know. But he was the singer, the kind of lead soloist for a ministry called the Billy Graham Crusades. And Billy Graham was an evangelist who traveled around the world. And one year, 1954, he was in London. George Beverly Shea brings this song, sings it in London. It just grabs people's heart and becomes an anthem, really, of Christians for a whole generation. Maybe even for people who haven't been much part of the church, but you may have even heard the tune. When you hear it, you might like, I know that. But what speaks to me about this song, it's going to speak about the faithfulness of God. It's literally drawn from Lamentations chapter 3, verse 23. Great is thy faithfulness. And you say, wait a second, Thomas, like things didn't turn out the way you planned. Like you were going to be a pastor, everything was going to be great, right? You did this wonderful thing, you prepared yourself, you got ordained, you took a church, and then you lose your health, and you end up having to be kind of sidelined for the rest of your life. And he said, I discovered that even in the difficulties of life, I could see God's faithfulness. And I chose to focus on him. And because he did, because he made the decision, God, I want to pursue your calling. I want you to be my portion. God was able to bless his life and bless many, many others. In fact, I've even asked my friends. I need all the help I can get. So I got some friends going to help me. We're going to try to sing the song he wrote. And even if you don't know it, I think you'll pick up a tune kind of on the end of it. Great is thy faithfulness. And maybe it'll stick in your mind. Because what I'd love for you to do this week is when you go to be the church, because this is not the church, right? This is almost like the locker room. The game is played out there, right? But we come here to get encouraged, not love. But you're going to go this week into a world that doesn't know that God is faithful. You're going to go to a world that doesn't know there's hope, that there's joy, that there's forgiveness, that there's grace. And I'm just praying that as you go to be the church, you'll understand it's not just about you doing that. It's about allowing God to do his work in you and through you, because he's faithful. He's faithful. And I'm praying this week someone's going to say, why do you have hope? Something's fishy going on here. Like, why do you have hope? What's going on? Tell me what's the deal. And for you to just be able to stop and say, because I serve a God who is so faithful. He's proven himself true. His chesed, you might don't throw that word in, that'll freak him out, right? But his chesed, his loving kindness endures forever. He is so good, and he's proven himself true. And we've got a world that's dying for hope. And the truth is, you have the answer. Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. Great is his faithfulness. So we're going to try this. Have I got your mic?
Yeah.
All right, I'll give you your mic. Let's see if we can do this guy. If I do this right. It's magic piano. Oh my. Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. That simply means he's always the same. Thou changest not, thy compassions they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever will be. Can you sing it? Stand with us. Great is thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, the mercies I see. God hath aided, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto
we go out and be the church, remember His faithfulness. You may not feel it, you may not remember it, but just constantly bring that memory back and bring those words back, because His word is true. You can have a seat real quick. So as we leave and we are going to be the church, if you're new here, I'd love to connect with you back at guest services, just across the hall outside there. We have a gift for you. Love to connect with you. If we can pray for you in any way, you can text the word prayer to 219-233-2311, and we would love to reach out and just connect with you about that as well. So that being said, church, I hope you know this, that God loves you and that I love you, and as we follow Him, we'll count on the best He has to offer for us. So let's go and be the church. Have a good week.